Good evening, everyone. Happy Thursday. It's another beautiful day here in Napa Valley. Just been quite gorgeous, I have to say. You can check that out on the live webcam. Great to see so many familiar faces. And I see Maggie's joining in there for the tasting. Good dog. Good to see everyone. And I hope you have a glass of wine in your hand as we get ready to experience a little bit of what's going on in the vineyard, at the winery, and most of all, about sustainable seafood. We're super excited to have the Carlsbad Aquafarm with us today. Thomas Grimm is the CEO and president. He's going to teach us a lot about very cool aquaculture and sustainable seafood. Of course, Chef Todd, our fantastic VP of viticulture and winemaking, Michael Scholes, and Michael Garcia out in the vineyard. You all know how to ask your questions on the chat. We'll also post those from Facebook and Instagram as well. And let's get going. Cheers, everyone. Great to see you. Michael Garcia, how's it looking out there in the vineyard?
It's looking great. You know, it's this time of year, it's almost like we can literally watch the vines grow. I'm in parcel 10 Malbec, and we were here last week, and if you look behind me, these vines are taking off. They've grown a few inches to a foot maybe, so looking good.
I think we need the close-up GoPro on them so we can watch them grow overnight and accelerate that with a little time lapse of a week. Be our new project versus the replanting GoPro. It looks great out there. And tell us what you've got going on this week in the vineyard.
Yeah, we're doing a lot. We're kind of finishing up suckering in some of our later parcels to push bud. But in parcels that have progressed as far as this one, we're moving wires, doing some canopy management to get the shoots growing straight up, keep them out of the way of any tractor, any wind damage that might occur. This is a sensitive time on a site like this where we get some high winds, where shoots are susceptible to breakage. So the wire lifting is a pretty important step that we've got going on.
You know, in this day of technology where we use so much technology to manage the vineyard like you do, it's kind of hard to imagine how you and the team are touching every vine by hand 20 to 25 times during the growing season to just make sure that the sun exposure is right, to make sure that you're not growing things that are taking away from the fruit flavor, and just managing the whole thing. I see some beautiful footage Ryan's putting up here. Looks like you took some shots this morning. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so that kind of panorama is just as the sun was coming up over the hill early this morning. And from there, I moved over to some of our hillside Sauvignon Blanc and got some shots of the clusters as well as the Semillon, so we could see some cluster shots and progression.
Wow.
Of the wine we're drinking today, the Virtú. And so the Sauvignon Blanc has progressed a little bit further than the Semillon, especially on the hillsides. It pushed bud faster, and the flower clusters are just opening. So I don't know if it's too discernible, but you can kind of see the caps falling off, and a little bit of white on there, which will be the anthers, the pollinating male flower parts. And that's in contrast to the Semillon, which we can see there, which is it's still pretty tight. So the clusters are formed, they're looking good, but not quite open yet. So interesting comparison.
It's exciting. You know, we should talk about the differences between the Semillon and the Sauvignon Blanc in the vineyard. I mean, not just ampelographically, as Ryan's showing us here, but also, you know, the Semillon grapes, they're so much softer when we get around to ripening, thinner skins. But tell us a little bit more about the differences between growing these two varietals.
Yeah, like you said, the skins and the fruit in the Semillon versus the Sauv Blanc are a major part of our consideration in what we do. And so the Sauvignon Blanc has tighter clusters with slightly thicker skins, and the Semillon's it sets a big crop. The clusters are relatively large, and the skins are soft. And we need to make sure that our cluster placement is very good, so we don't have overcrowding, we don't have clusters bunching into each other and breaking. And we want to avoid any rot. And so Semillon in this environment, we don't have a huge high rot pressure because it's fairly warm. We get some wind. It's relatively dry, and that's California in general. But the pressure's still there with the thin skins, and in a place like Bordeaux, the rot pressure is much higher. It can be desirable in some circumstances, as in Sauterne, but here in Napa Valley, we don't want any rot in our Semillon. So the suckering and the cluster placement is a big consideration there versus the Sauvignon Blanc.
Oh, Michael, we lost you. Oh, well, I think that we've lost the signal out in the country. So we'll jump over to Michael Scholes. And as the VP of Viticulture, Michael, I know you can tell me what else is going on in the vineyard. Every season has its harvest challenges. And this year's is we're starting off very dry. So be great for you to share with us some of the things you and Michael Garcia are doing in the vineyard to manage that water to create and grow the very best fruit that you can.
Yeah, Emma, there's a lot going on in the vineyard, but there always is during the season a lot going on, and every season is a little bit different. And that's just one of the unique things we're seeing on this commencement of this one is the fact that we've had a very dry winter. So we have very dry conditions, and we do need to keep an eye on that and manage that. So we look at our water supply, and we look at how much water a plant needs, and we consider that in our water budgeting. We also measure what sort of moisture there is in the soil. So what you see on screen right now is a display from one of our soil sensors. And these soil sensors, they're actually typically they're about a little over a meter deep, and about every 10 centimeters, they have a sensor on them that will tell us the percent moisture in that soil. And that's important because that allows us to have an assessment of how quickly the ground is drying out. And with that, we can consider should we put some irrigation on or should we not? And of course, that we have a couple of reasons to irrigate. One is to keep the plant healthy. The other one, however, is to maintain a healthy level of stress within the plant, because we know that a little stress will lead to high quality fruit. Because as a plant is stressed, it's going to be more inclined to want to ripen its fruit and do a good job doing that. And what ripe fruit will achieve is great wine. So there's this very delicate balance we have. But equally to that, in this year with our water supply, we just need to be very cautious about how we use that water and when we use it. So those soil and moisture probes will help us with that sort of situation, Anna.
Yeah, super. And, the other tools that I always find fascinating as we move further into the season is just using the pressure bombs and measuring the water potential in the vine. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Mm-hmm. So pressure bomb, it sounds like a wild term or a wild piece of equipment, but it's not at all. It measures leaf water potential, but it's sort of slang kind of name. It's pressure bomb, they call it, and that's because you actually take a leaf and you put it in a bag and you apply pressure to that leaf and look for how much pressure it will take to push the moisture out of the leaf. The more moisture in the leaf, the less pressure it will take. The less moisture in the leaf, the more pressure it will take. So what that does is you're actually measuring leaf water potential. And basically, if there's less water in the leaf, your vine has less of water available to it. So that's what a pressure bomb is all about, or leaf water potential measurement is. And we do that through the season as it warms up particularly. We do that through the season to just check both to have the information from the soil and moisture probes and also the information from the plant itself to tell us what sort of level of stress is that plant under, and is that a healthy level or is that something we need to alleviate. So yeah, that's what we do with the pressure bomb.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Gosh, it sure is a pretty day out there at the ranch and seeing the vineyard. But let's talk a little bit about the winemaking of this delicious wine. You started making the Virtú and the Élu for us on your first tour of duty, starting in what was it, 1996? And making this wine and creating this style of a Napa Valley white Bordeaux varietal blend. And, Napa Valley, here we are in this Mediterranean climate versus Bordeaux's maritime climate. Do you want to talk about a little bit about the difference and kind of what came through to you when you were designing and creating this wine for the first time? With that French influence that we have with our French founding at Saint-Exupéry.
Well, I was fortunate at the start that the French owner of the company, Robert Scully, had planted both Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon. So I had those resources at my disposal, which was a fabulous opportunity for me, because I grew up in Australia, of course, in the Barossa Valley, where Sauvignon Blanc is a significant player in that field there. So I'd work with, Semillon is a significant player in that field there. So I'd worked with Semillon quite a lot. And I like the variety. It's one that I kind of think is super interesting. And but yeah, listen, we went about trying to mold a wine, a blend that would be interesting. Of course, we took a little vision from what the Bordelais do, and because in Bordeaux they grow a lot of Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc, and also with a little bit of an idea of what I'd grown up with in Australia. So the Australians had done a lot of blending of Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc together. And so in Bordeaux, we were seeing wines that were delicate and elegant and subtle. In Australia, you're seeing wines that more ripe, opulent, fruit-driven and what have you. So we looked at both of those sides of the equation and considered that in our blending option, and along with what our vineyards can achieve here, and came up with a sort of a mellow blend balance between the two of those, which is kind of cool. Yeah, that's
yeah, it is. I always think of Australia for the Semillon and Chardonnay blends versus Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc, because those Sem-Chard blends are so popular when you're in the country. But this blend, it's really the only white wine that we make that's age-worthy, significantly age-worthy, and kind of fun to age. Earlier on, we had some folks who had a 2009 to 2019 vertical, and there's not a lot of 2019 left. I think we just have a few cases at the winery, and then the rest is held for the wine club. But let's talk a little bit about the fermentation style. I'm drinking the 2019, which is a little bit unique to how you've been making in the past. You're always coming up with some new way to enhance the wine flavor. I'm curious what vintages other people are drinking. Do let us know on the chat, and we'll pick Michael's brain about those. But tell us a little bit about the 2019, because it was unique. We've been experimenting with those small concrete tanks, but you brought more of those in for this vintage.
Yeah, so we're always dabbling in little things all the time in the cellar, trying to understand what options there are out there and what options we haven't considered and what can we do to enhance our winemaking. And so, but we do it cautiously, because we want to make sure that we make good decisions. We also don't want to make dramatic changes in our wine styles. But one of the things we did try was a little small concrete tank work quite some time ago, and then we brought in some concrete tanks, some more significant ones, particularly for our red wine program, because it's quite interesting there. But realizing that we could use it in some of our whites, so we sort of did that. And the Virtú in the past has been a wine that's where it's fermented partly in stainless steel and partly in barrel. And what the stainless steel will do is it will retain opulent fruit and what have you, whereas the barrels will contribute some barrel flavor, some toasty qualities, and some complexity, essentially. So that, coupled with the fact that we leave the wine on its yeast lees for 5 months, which brings on some more complexity and that sort of some pear qualities and that creamy quality you get from the lees maturation and so forth. But what we found was the concrete, that we put the wine in there, and we came up with some totally different nuances, which are super interesting. And so some of those are sort of more of a mineral quality, and they enhance what we already see in some sort of Sauvignon Blanc wines and so forth. But that sort of wet stone sort of quality, or sometimes you have the sense of that river running through a forest across the rocks, that sort of sense and smell. It also brought along what an apparent salinity a little bit, just not a great deal, but a little, which gives you a real feel of freshness, of ocean spray, of being by the sea a little bit. And so really cool concepts. But we managed to thread some of that into this wine. And on this vintage of 2019, we actually put 17% into this blend, which is not huge, but not insignificant as well. So it really has had a bit of an impact on this particular vintage, and we'll keep working on that in the future and probably maintain it somewhere around that 15% or 17 in this case for the wines, because it really made the wine a little even more interesting than it was before, it was great before. Yeah.
Well, I think that you're getting that salinity from eating Thomas's fantastic oysters with this wine, or it's just making it the perfect sustainable seafood wine. So to enjoy with that little bit of salinity. So let's jump over to Thomas Grimm, the CEO and president of Carlsbad Aquafarm, and just an amazing facility, research, environmental contributor to bettering our oceans, and just so interesting. So Thomas, welcome, and do tell us how you got started in aquaculture.
Well, thanks for the introduction, and that's very generous compliments. I got involved with this a number of years ago. I had come from doing research up in Mountain View. Some of the work was at NASA Ames Research Center, and other work dealing with algal culture, which is a very fundamental part of growing oysters and shellfish, which of course has their diet includes phytoplankton from the ocean. I had, prior to that, my education included wildlife biology and chemistry and a lot of other things. But I got really intrigued with this particular aspect of cultivating something that actually makes the ocean healthier. I grew up in a family that was in ranching, and so that can be pretty hard on the environment sometimes. But in my journey through various sorts of my checkered past, I guess, it included a number of different things. But I ended up buying this what became a really lovely boutique farm. It's not a gigantic farm, but it's one that we do culture and research numbers of different shellfish for domestication purposes. So on that slide that is there, we maybe could talk through that, or however you want to go through that.
Yeah.
The farm itself is about 35 miles north of the city of San Diego. And as you can see in the far left-hand box, the water flows into the lagoon. It's a 3-pool lagoon, and then it flows out again at a rate of about 1 billion gallons a day.
Wow.
Part of the flow is caused by both, the tidal prism, but also the influence of a watershed from the Cleveland National Forest that brings in alkaline water, where Carlsbad gets its name. It's named after a spa in what was Bohemia back in the 12th century. And the water is this very legendary healthy water, but it's also healthy for the shellfish we grow there. And then it is discharged back out into the coastal area, which is a public state beach. The next image is our tractor. Unlike the harvesting equipment you guys have in Napa, this is our tractor, so to speak, with a 3-ton crane that lifts up stacks of oysters and mussels and other things we're doing now, scallops. What we do, just like your experts have talked about, we also touch our oysters a number of times through their cultivation, from the spawning activity to what you see here in the third frame over, which is tumbling, which creates a little stress on the animals. We spin them around just like oysters do when they're on the beach with an intertidal area. The waves surge back and forth and it rolls them along the beach. And what happens is it creates a little bit of stress, so they produce more sugar, they grow more meaty as an adaptation to that stress. And that tumbling you can see below that picture of the farm aerial is where we tumble and spin these oysters, and then we wash them before putting them into our purging tanks, which basically allow the shellfish to filter water that's been purified through sand filters and cartridge filters and ultraviolet light and so forth. So the water is exceptionally pure. And as a result of that, all of the grit and things that you might find in some of the shellfish that you may have sampled does not exist in our, we're the only company in this part of the United States that goes through this extra step. On the far right, that's when I started the farm a few years ago. We had a lot of mussels in that tank I'm pulling out. And below that is my wife and grandson, who his dad lives up in Tiburon. And that's his very first chucked oyster. He's a little oyster ranger there. And then you see on the bottom frame the difference between a spat and then a cupped oyster, which grows into the kind of shape that we like because it holds a lot more of the liqueur as well as the meat. And we can move on to the next frame.
Can I just go back, Thomas, to the purging? Because, I do remember from my upper division food microbiology classes, like this is the most important thing to happen with an oyster is the purging. And what I'm understanding is you're actually using that fantastic Carlsbad water, but just purifying it before it goes through so nothing can happen. Is that correct?
I'm glad you raised that question. The water in the lagoon is unique because it has this contribution from these alkaline spring waters from this national forest nearby us. And that water flows through this calcareous limestone that makes it having that alkaline characteristics. And that water flows there into our purging tanks. And so each of these shellfish filters 50 gallons a day. So they completely purge out any sorts of algae and other things that might otherwise be in the open ocean. So it's just pure seawater, but it's like when you talk about with the wines, there's a miroir, there's sort of every body of water has its own flavor. This one is unique because of the contribution of the spring waters and also the wild Pacific water here, which is very, very clean and pure as well. So that's what contributes to the unique flavor that we have.
Yeah, that's super that you do that. That's really wonderful.
Yeah, it's great, and it keeps the lagoon healthy. This is a little picture of our farm. This is a sketch I did to kind of plan for adding on some additional features of the boardwalk and so forth that we added in there, so to kind of create a sense of the design that where we're going. Below, we show a couple little market places, and again, these are just rough sketches I did to kind of convey an idea of where we're headed with this. The city of Carlsbad has asked us many times, can we open it up to the public to do tours? And this is kind of a response to that, to design something where the public can come in and feel comfortable and get close to the farming activities, just like they do in Napa with these wonderful vineyards like you have, but in a way that they can also do some sampling and tastings and learn how to shuck them and hopefully find some lovely pairings with the experts from your beautiful facilities up there.
Oh, we can help with that.
Well, that's great. And the way we farm varies depending upon the species. So on the left-hand side, you see mussels both above the water and below where you really can't see it normally. And you can see the lines which the crane, about a 3-ton crane, lifts up. And then when they're ready to harvest, they put these ropes, they strip them off into these totes. And then it goes through a process of removing the beards, called debissing, of little bissel threads that they use to hold onto their rope. And so the mussels are a very unique and interesting animal. We're growing now California mussels, so we try to focus on native species. On the right-hand side is a area where we're farming oysters, and you can see the floats are different. The floats for oysters are round, like big basketballs, and the ones on the left are barrel floats. And under each individual ball float is a stack of trays that have our oysters growing in them. And that's what was used to grow in what they call suspended culture, the oysters that you are sampling up there in your beautiful facility today. If we move ahead with these images, I'm going to show you a couple other points. This is why our oysters are very different than what one sees from the Chesapeake or often in Puget Sound, because we grow them in suspended culture. They're not growing in the mud or in the bottom of the area where they get preyed upon, actually, by a lot of sea stars and other things. They live in the suspended state. And so as a result of that, you can see this beautiful shell color that they have that is so attractive, and a very meaty animal as well because of the way we handle and grow them. And some of our staff here, which are from all over the place, from Russia and Scotland and England and New Zealand, which is probably the best place for growing mussels in the world, at least the best experts are. So we learn a lot from other people. So I have been learning very rapidly all the different arts of how they grow things in France versus in Iceland and so forth. Let's move ahead with the slides, and we can.
Thomas, just that comment on growing in different places. Last year when we were talking to an oyster farmer in northern Maine, he was commenting on the temperature of the water and how slowly his oysters grow. Being in Southern California, are you a little faster than say Alaska or northern Maine, or the timing that it takes to grow the oysters?
We have a Mediterranean climate. It's kind of a Mediterranean meets maritime climate, and as a result, we have the fastest growing oysters that we know of anywhere, because we grow year round. The water's warmer and it's really nutrient rich because we have an abundance of organic farms that encircle the lagoon. So there's strawberry fields and there's every kind of fruit and vegetable grown anywhere. Seems to be growing in northern San Diego County. But along with it, they contribute to the nutrients that make the algal load in the water enough to have these oysters grow exceptionally fast and healthy and meaty. So let's go ahead with these images, if I may. So if you can see here, this is looking at the mussels underneath the barrel floats. And that little faint lines there, the vertical lines are these vertical lines of mussels hanging down. Now these barrels are actually black, but we have in the evening brown pelicans which roost on pretty much every float there, which we're happy to say they actually act as sort of sentinels, because any fish that get near our oysters become part of the pelican. So they're very I would not say aggressive, but they're very skilled at getting the fish that might otherwise prey on our shellfish. You can see our mussels in there, and this is a life support system. We can go ahead. Yeah, this is something we created to test for domesticating new types of shellfish we want to add to the mix of offerings we have, and actually to the industry as a whole. So we do a lot of research. On the far left, we see California mussels. They're very different color. To the far left, and in the middle is a green abalone. We've grown various species of abalone, which we use for strictly restoration purposes. We send them all up to the UC Davis Bodega Labs, where they have people who are focused just on taking care of our beautiful native abalone. In the next frame over below that is the rock scallop. It's actually called the purple hinge rock scallop because there's a purple color faint in the inner shell that is a very beautiful purple color. And then there's the California spot prawn. These are all natives to California's rich bounty of seafood, but they're not really part of the culinary farming activities so much, particularly the rock scallop and California mussel, which is what we've been successful in culturing. So here you can see what the rock scallops look like, where those little blue eyes are dot around the entire circle or half circle of the scallop, which has a hinge on the other end. So they swim around, but eventually they settle down onto rock structures, which is why they're called rock scallops. And they have a delectable adductor muscle that is a little bit richer in the glycogen, so it's a little sweeter, not real sweet, but it's just sweeter than a lot of scallops. A very flavorful. And one, it's probably the most sought after scallop in the world from the standpoint of these Michelin chefs that request that we give them some of our little storage of them. And at some point, we have to do something special with your chef to do something with rock scallops and have something that's very, very unique we could offer up there. And if we move ahead with some of these other images here, we can see a type of plant called it's called Gracilaria. The Japanese call it ogo. And it's very, we work with Hawaiian native peoples where they use that in making poke mix, and other chefs do as well. We're working on extracting the gelides that are an alternative to the pectin that's used in making gummies. So we make a gummy. My wife came up with the thing, she calls it marine munchies. I'm not a marketer, but she said, okay, we're gonna make these gummies out of the gel that comes out of this particular seaweed, and it's delicious. We obviously have different flavorings we add to it, but it has a lot of natural, what they call carotenoids and astaxanthin, which is an antioxidant about 400 times stronger than vitamin E, for example, or what you find in blueberries. Very, very potent and very good for cosmetics uses as well. But these are things that we thought would be better than just giving them sugar and pectin from pigskin to something healthy that you can grow from the ocean. So it's a very sustainable way to provide nutrients for kids. That's also very good for them. And if we go into the next picture here, this is our workhorse in Carlsbad. And what we do with our workers is really emphasize the approach of very carefully culturing these animals in a way that improves the water. As I mentioned with the purification discussion, each shellfish filters 50 gallons. And so since we have several 100 million shellfish, we filter the entire volume of the lagoon between 12 and 18 hours, depending upon other factors. So it makes the water very, very clean. And so we're one of the few places where you have agriculture that makes the water and the environment better than when you start it. And this is it's I wouldn't want to do it. I'm doing this in part because of my own interest in habitat restoration. We take the oyster shells, for example, and use those for habitat restoration. This is a little drawing we did to emphasize the fact that we're just like you guys in the sense we're farmers. We farm the ocean, not with somebody asks you, do you actually use a plow? I say, well, no, but and
that's good.
Yeah, but we try to the goal is to keep our head above water, right? At least financially. Right. But the farm is a very special part of the culture of Carlsbad. It's the only farm in Southern California, and it's there because of its historic role in doing research in these habitat restoration activities we do. We have other types of research that I mentioned in terms of restoring habitat and waters in San Diego Bay and Newport Beach and other places. And we also donate a lot of our oyster shells to Department of Fish and Wildlife, which uses the shells. They just sprinkle on beaches where there's snowy plovers, which the shells look very much like these eggs of these birds. And so it confuses the predators. So seagulls pick up 5 or 6 oyster shells. I guess these aren't eggs, So it's called in the vernacular of the aviary ornithology, they call it crypsis, which just means just to fake out the seagulls, essentially.
Well, that's great. And I'm really interested in the restorative aquaculture that you're doing. Can you give a few more examples of that? Because I think it's just fascinating.
Well, one of the things they do, Emma, what the oysters do is the shells themselves, not the meat, the shells absorb different, they do what's called an ionic exchange. They have a positive charge of 2 that is the same as copper. And so it's a way to remove copper out of the water without any chemicals. And copper isn't always bad. But too much copper can be a neurotoxin, particularly to fish that lose their way when there's too much copper, or what they call free copper, in the water column. And that water gets too much copper sometimes from brake linings and insecticides, particularly from the coatings of the anti-fouling paint that sports fishermen and mariners, the Navy uses a lot. So in San Diego Bay, what they have such a huge presence of the U.S. Navy, there's a lot of copper because there's a lot of big ships there. And so we're working with those folks to deploy just the shells to remove that copper. It's proven to be incredibly effective up in Puget Sound, where in some of those embayments, that's removed like over 90% of the copper out of the water. And again, it's not the oyster animal so much, it's the shell itself. It's so special. So it has other ecological benefits that make the water cleaner and healthier. And it's what they call a foundation species, meaning that it's a habitat maker. We create things which are oyster reefs. We found a way to use the coir, which is from a coconut fiber, to make into a type of mesh. We put shells in it, and then we put those shells we stake it along the shoreline, and that grows into a reef to protect the shoreline from eroding as the water levels rise, as they will inevitably do, as well as from activities from boaters that can create waves that hit the shore and sometimes can erode it. And these shellfish break that all up. They're using those a lot in the North Carolina and a lot of the coastal areas there from these outer banks where these oyster reefs can protect these rather vulnerable communities from storm surges.
That's fabulous. We've got a question from George. He wants to know where your shellfish are sold retail.
Well, the biggest regional distributor is Whole Foods, and we sell to different restaurant chains and so forth. Whole Foods is very much a stickler for the quality. So we go through a very rigorous additional set of testings, over 200 separate tests to make sure that they're absolutely pure. And so Whole Foods is one place you could get them, but we'd be looking to find up in that area, as I mentioned to you a little earlier. I've got family up there, so I don't need a lot of arm twisting to go up to visit my family up there, up in your neck of the woods. We're not selling right now in that area. We have demand that is 2 years out. So the people place orders way ahead of our production of even planting them, but we still reserve some for special partners and projects, like I mentioned, and for special sorts of innovators in the culinary arts and what you're doing in sustainable farming. It'd be really fun to explore how we could work with you.
Yes, we love that. And David is asking, he's saying he'll be in Carlsbad in a few weeks. Are you open for visitors?
We are. We just started a tour business at the urging of the local city council. They said, you've been in the community. Actually, it started well before I was around. It started in its research stages in the 1950s. And so it's been around, but people have always said, what is all that stuff out in the water? A lot of them don't know. And so we got a tour boat and a little runabout, and we take people out and see our research facilities, which are quite fascinating, as well as the farming activities and all the different things we do. So they're welcome to come out there, be my guest, give me a call, and we'll show them around.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And George is just asking, he's in San Diego. Will the local Whole Foods there be one of your purveyors?
It will be. It is. They over Mother's Day, they purchased an enormous. Well, that's Mother's Day, right? But they had this crazy order, and it was fun to get all that together. So certainly in San Diego, at the Whole Foods there, Newport Beach, a lot of the places. I used to go at Encinitas, which is near where I don't know if you know these little towns around here, but yeah, Whole Foods is a big fan of ours, and we're a big fan of theirs. They're a great partner with us, and they support little small farmers. I'm just a little simple farm boy, so this is fun to have a partner like Whole Foods.
And any San Diego restaurants you could suggest?
There are a lot of them. I think pretty good percentage of the restaurants in San Diego. There's I know King's Fish House has a line called Water Grill, which is a real 5-star version. They got Fish House, which is more, it's not white tablecloth, but it's a really fine middle of the road kind of place. We've got, Ironside. There's so many restaurants, Brigantine and the like in San Diego who carry our stuff. So
you can have a little Brigantine. You can have our Sauvignon Blanc there with the.
Now you're talking.
Now we're talking.
Yeah, that'd be fun. That'd be great.
Well, we're gonna have to get you a retail finder on your website, like we have for our wine, for everybody to find their oysters, and your other the scallops are fantastic, and lots of love being spread there for the Brigantine too online here.
One interesting thing that I didn't mention, that is kind of an odd little side note. Carlsbad's lagoon around the shoreline there, they discovered what they call shellfish middens. These are from people who lived, coastal people who lived and migrated along the coast 14,000 years ago. So some of the very first people in the Western Hemisphere, before they infilled into the interior of North America, moved along the coast, and they stayed on the Channel Islands, and they stayed right around the shoreline of Carlsbad in places like that, eating shellfish and seaweeds and so forth as the first foods of the first people to grace the shores of the Western Hemisphere. So the tradition of Carlsbad, I can say, goes back not more than 50 years to 14,000 years. So it goes back a ways.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Thomas. Let's see what Chef Todd has in the kitchen with your glorious oysters that you've kindly sent up to us. Chef, let's see this chowder.
Sure, my pleasure. Always fun to make chowder, especially when you have some great sustainable seafood. One of the things I wanted to do was kind of make it from scratch. I also wanted to utilize a lot of the product. So what I did on the recipe, if you're kind of following along, if you can source the same type of ingredients or seek out sustainable things. In particular, I'm using some beautiful shrimp from Kauai, which I asked for head on and tail on and shell on, essentially, so that I can peel those down and utilize it so I can build the foundation of my chowder by making a really nice kind of a seafood stock. And so what you'll find is that I initially, before I even started doing any of the cooking of the chowder, I put together in some water with a little bit of our wine, using some of our Sauvignon Blanc, and I put it together along with the shrimp shells and some of the trim from the vegetables. So you know that when you're preparing your chowder ingredients and a lot of the things that go into it, the classical things that you might have there from your onions and your leeks, all of these vegetables are going to generate, you got some nice cube pieces here. They're going to generate some trim pieces, which you can definitely utilize as a stock reinforcer. And so I've got some leeks here. I've got some onions. Over here, we've definitely got our potatoes with the skin still on for a little substance. It's about a ½ inch, nice size pieces there. I also, a traditional chowder ingredient is to have some bacon. A lot of times it's salt pork or maybe some ham, something like that. Those are the classic main things that you find in this style of a chowder. Now, this is kind of a variation of a San Francisco style chowder. It has its origins coming all the way from New England style, where they originally came over from the earliest settlers coming from the west coast of France, where they would use cream, they would use butter, they would also use flour and to make a roux to thicken it. And it was obviously one of those hearty type of things that they had because it was so cold there in the winters on the coast of New England. So that's where the kind of the origins of it started from. The actual name of the chowder comes from the actual pot that it's cooked in. There's a lot of dishes that actually have that kind of beginning of where they started is the name of the actual pot, the chaudière, meaning essentially to boil, to cook it in that pot where they all boiled together. So eventually it becomes chowder. It comes to our country and it's made its way throughout. There's the version that you'll find with tomato and bell peppers from the Italian immigrants who started in New York and in particular in Manhattan there. So that Manhattan style chowder is a little bit different than what we're doing here. But this one is a fresh version of a seafood chowder, not just clams. I did want to make a nice stock to go with this as opposed to using canned clam juice, which I think a lot of times is too strong for me and also too salty.
Too salty.
The interesting difference here is that as opposed to using half and half or milk or cream, I'm actually finishing mine with some creme fraiche. So extra richness and culture in there. I'm going to use that as a finishing dairy product to go with it. And then my thickening ingredient is actually using sourdough starter. This is sourdough discard. I've been keeping a small amount of sourdough starter going here. And, you know, in order to keep it alive, you have to pour some of the sourdough starter out, which is called discard. And as opposed to discarding it, I thought I would pour it into my chowder base, my stock there, as a thickening ingredient, because it does essentially have flour and water in there that's uncooked. So it has some nice thickening power. Now,
and I see you have butter and bacon as well.
Butter and bacon,
so
yes.
You know, it's
those wonderful hearty things. You gotta
I'm on to you, Todd.
Yeah. So here's my beautiful, essentially a shrimp stock that's reinforced with a lot of the trim. I've got bay leaf and thyme in there. Really fragrant and nice. And it only takes maybe about 15 minutes to get the flavor extracted out of those shrimp shells and the shrimp heads and everything. So that's a great tip, and you can utilize that for a lot of different seafood-based soups or stews and things like that.
So Todd,
so now that you have that, yes.
Todd, after our lobster feed on Saturday, can we use our lobster shells if we don't have any of those beautiful shrimp?
Sure. I mean, they have been boiled away because you're cooking them off. I'll demonstrate that, but you can still get some flavor out of them. So if you hang on to those shells after you've cracked it open, you save the head, the tail parts and things like that, all the shell parts, you can still get a little more flavor out of them, especially if you were to take them and put them into a oven on a pan and basically roast them. So you can get a little more flavor, and then go ahead and add your water, your extra vegetables, whatever trimmed vegetables you have in there. And you can definitely get some nice flavor out of it. Little splash of white wine in there is nice as well. So I did strain out about maybe 3 cups worth of my nice seafood stock, my shrimp stock there. That's going to be the base liquid. To save some time on this, the first initial steps here in this particular recipe is to use some of that bacon fat, which I already cooked off and saved the garnish for later on. And I saved some of the bacon fat and I cooked the onions and the leeks in there. Now, if you wanted to do it without any pork product or meat in there, you could definitely do that. Just use some oil or some butter. But basically, this is kind of sweated down and soft and translucent. So the flavor is nice and soft. There's a background flavor. It's a foundational flavor there. And so what I'm going to do now is go ahead and add that shrimp stock in there. I'll bring it up to a simmer. But that whole process there probably is taking very slow kind of a cooking or sweating, as we call it. And that will take a few minutes. So that's why I kind of jumped ahead on that step just to show you. So that probably saved me about maybe 6 to 8 minutes of very, very low kind of covered sweating on there to get them nice and soft. So I'm going to bring this up to temperature. I already have some pretty good amount of salt in here. So between the fresh seafood that we have and the bacon, I'm not going to necessarily need to add any more. Here's my selection of sustainable seafood that I wanted to show off here. On the side over here, I've got some beautiful Kauai shrimp. These come in fresh. Here's the head-on part. So you can see that I already peeled them all down. I deveined them and I cut the tails lengthwise. So they split and they kind of curl up like a corkscrew. It's got a nice mouthful when you bite into it that way. You can also cut it into big chunks if you wanted to as well. So great flavor in there, very sustainable product, and farm raised in Hawaii. And then from Washington State, where I'm from, these are Manila clams, very small and sweet. I love them. They're tender. They got a really cool kind of a shell on the outside, a lot of different patterns. Prior to doing anything, I soak these in a little bit of sea salt and water, and I kind of flush them and allow them to soak for just a little while, maybe about 15 minutes, in case they need to purge out any of their sand. I'm also checking these to see that, number one, they should be closed nice and tight. If they do open up like they're gasping, you want to go ahead and squeeze them. If they close, then they're still alive. If they do not, then you want to just discard them. And then Thomas was kind enough to send these up to us overnight and get these beautiful oysters. They came in fresh this morning. Here's an example of some of those oysters from that Carlsbad Bay right there. And they have so many layers of shell built up here. These are some of the hardest oysters for me to open. And you can see, if you see that deep, deep cup there, means that because of the way that it's been built and turned and tossed, it develops that deep cup where a lot of that natural oyster nectar and juice is already kind of channeled into. So I went ahead and pre-shucked quite a few of those, and I actually saved the juice as well. I make sure there's no shell fragments as you shuck them. And they're all basically ready to go into this chowder base as I have that ready to go.
And we do have a bonus track on our YouTube channel of you demonstrating how to shuck if anyone needs a quick lesson from Chef
That's right. So you can kind of review it. You can slow it down and pause it or go back on it. Now that my liquid is up to, my stock is up to a simmer there, I'm going to go ahead and add the potatoes. I want these to cook into it. They're going to absorb the flavor as well, but also the potato and the starch is going to be a thickening agent that will help to give it that body that chowder is known for. So let's imagine now that these need to simmer, and I'm going to guess and say they might take maybe about 8 minutes or so. I don't want them to cook all the way through or boil them rapidly to the point where they just kind of wear away and they turn into like a potato puree or mashed potato, as opposed to nice chunks of potato that chowder is really known for. So I'm going to go ahead and imagine that, for sakes of time in this demo to show you how this all works, I'm going to imagine that we're almost done on our potatoes. They've kind of simmered very nicely. I keep it at a nice simmer temperature as opposed to a rapid boil. And then the next step here is going to be actually for me to add in my thickening agent or the sourdough culture in here. So the sourdough discard is nice because it's going to add some of that real sourdough fermented kind of flavor, and it's also going to give it the viscosity that we're looking for. So it's doing twofold here. You know, imagine the Virtú with all of those rich kind of barrel fermentation and malolactic and all that wonderful rich mouthfeel. This is almost like the same kind of thing with the sourdough characteristic in there. So as you can see, it's up to a nice simmer. What I'm going to do to help this incorporate this in is I'm actually going to pour my sourdough starter into a side bowl here. This is maybe anywhere from 2 to 3 ounces, depending on how thick you want it. But the flavor is pretty tangy. It's going to be an obvious, you'll be able to obviously taste that nice sourdough culture and tang in there. So I'm going to take some of this hot stock and just kind of add a little bit in here to do like a tempering method, and then kind of whisk it up. So this way it's already kind of smoothened out as opposed to dumping it in and having it kind of clump up right away. And then I'm just going to go ahead and kind of pour and drizzle and stir at the same time. And immediately when it hits that heat, if you're about 180 degrees, you're going to find that the starches in the flour start to gelatinize and thicken. They absorb. And immediately I've got this kind of viscosity going on here.
Wow, that was fast.
Yeah, so now remember, these potatoes, obviously we were guessing that they were going to be almost done at that 8-minute mark or so, depending on how big you make your potatoes and how rapid of a simmer that you have. So now that you're at that point, that's when you can go ahead and add your creme fraiche or your dairy into it. Now, if you don't have creme fraiche, obviously you can use some heavy cream, some half and half. It'll be a little lighter. I really enjoy the creme fraiche because of the fact that it's so rich. So again, another 2 to 3 ounces or so, all depending on how much you want to put in there. And then go ahead and give that a stir in. And it's stable. You can cook it, even though it comes across like a thick sour cream or a thin cheese. It will add the body, the richness, that nice dairy that's in there, kind of plays off of the malolactic in the wine. And now just imagine that this needs to simmer a little while. Once you've got that thickness in there and your potato and your flour from the discard, plus that creme fraiche are all kind of coming in together, it's going to come up to a nice simmer. And then this point is when I'm going to start to actually add the seafood into it. So let me swap out to one that I've already done ahead. I'll use my Zoom burners just to kind of show you the difference. If you can see from raw here to a finished one right here.
Oh, beautiful.
So the color is obviously intensified. It is much richer. It just has some nice thickness to it. The potatoes are tender, but they're still holding their shape. That's an important thing. I don't want any crunchy or mushy potatoes, opposite. And essentially it's all ready to go. So nice and thick. Nice part about this is there's plenty of seasoning and salt and flavor that the seafood is going to impart to this. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and turn it up just a little bit. First in is going to be my clams because they're going to take a little while to pop open, but not that long. Okay, now that I'm up to a little simmer, just go ahead and put your clams directly in. So this will be the one that will have the shell kind of garnish in there. And that's why I like to soak them and clean them. A lot of times I'll use a dedicated scrub brush in the kitchen as a shellfish brush to scrub not only the oyster shells, but any kind of shellfish that I have here. So by kind of just letting them tuck in there, they're going to hit that heat and it's going to cause them to pop open. Their natural nectar is going to open up and flavor this chowder. It doesn't take very long. And from there, I'm ready to go because my shrimp are cut in half. So they're very thin, as well as the oysters that I definitely don't want to overcook too much. So it's really relying on this residual heat, this temperature that you have here at a nice little simmer, maybe about 190 degrees or so, just below a boil, a rapid boil. So enough to get these clams to open up. You can always check your seasoning at the end after you've got all your seafood in there because they are imparting that wonderful flavor of the sea. If you want to hit it with a little splash of lemon at the end, you can definitely do that. A lot of tradition in this area. It's famous to have your chowder poured into a hollowed out small sourdough bowl. You know, that's the whole San Francisco connection there. If you ever go down to Fisherman's Wharf, that's you'll find a lot of those seafood bowls around, and it's always hard for people to finish the sourdough bowl. But the chowder is almost always gone. And so now as these are just about to pop open, at that point, I know that's when I'm going to go ahead and add the shrimp and then the oysters and then shut it off and allow this residual temperature to just kind of cook them just right. Okay, nicely popped open clam, nice and plump, not rubbery and tough.
I think Michael's going to be racing up there to the kitchen
I bet he will.
As soon as those oysters go in. I think he's going to be running upstairs to you, Todd.
Oh, they're so good, and those oysters, yeah, Thomas's oysters, they are so meaty. They've got that really nice texture to them. It's incredible. they hold up really well for this type of a dish. I mean, obviously you can broil them, you can eat them on the half shell, but they've just got that nice kind of texture and meatiness to them. So as you can see, the clams are basically all opening. I'm going to go ahead and cut the heat and then sprinkle in or gather the rest of the shrimp to put in. They cook up very quickly as well.
I think that's been one of my greatest improvements I've learned from you, Todd, in cooking shrimp is just to turn off the heat and stir them in like that, and they don't overcook. It's
Yeah,
just brilliant.
they just basically almost like poach in this chowder / sauce. That's a great way to do that. And then also go ahead and pour in your oysters, which for the most part, a lot of people like them not boiled and firm, but kind of just warm through all the way. So all of this residual heat that you have going on here is going to warm it through just right. So it's nice and succulent, but yet all the flavor is still cooking into this chowder base. You'll see the color of the shrimp start to change, and you'll see the lip of the oysters start to kind of curl just a bit. That's when you know it's basically just about done. And then from there, you're ready to serve it. As it's even sitting here, still continuing to cook. If you've got yourself a nice bowl and maybe you have some sourdough bread, maybe you don't. If you really love the bacon end of it, you could also put some of the bacon in with this and fold it in if you like the little bits all throughout. Otherwise, you can definitely save it and use it for a topping garnish. You know, you might want to do a little bit of both. Maybe I'll put some in here. So you get that flavor infused into it even more.
So today, bacon is a substitute for edible flowers. Is that what's happening?
Bacon is a substitute for edible flowers. Yeah, no reason to put flowers on this dish where it's just going to kind of melt away into it all. So that looks pretty good. As I look at all of these, I can tell the oysters just set. These shrimp are just beginning to kind of turn their color and curl just slightly. So that looks really good.
That's beautiful.
So then from there, I do have some sourdough bread, some fresh, you know, you can just dip right into it. You also could toast it if you really want that nice texture in there. But just go ahead and plate yourself a really nice bowl of this or two. I've got a little lemon wedge on there just in case you want some lemon to go with it to brighten it up even more.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
Chunks, beautiful. Potatoes, creamy texture in there.
Now, are there any vegetables that you might put in as a like celery or carrots at any point, or
celery and carrots would work as well? Sure, if you wanted to add a little extra vegetable substance to it, you can definitely do that. Here's the beautiful shrimp. Yeah, so you can definitely add those in. You know, this is again the recipes. I try to keep them on a fairly basic level for you to kind of get in and going. Here's the more of the clams, and then by all means add your own personalization to it. That's part of the fun of it all. So you can see that nice viscosity from that richness.
Yeah, that's
whether or not you want to put a pat of butter in there is entirely up to you. I think it's all pretty rich, but I did have some butter on the tray there just in case. I'm gonna go ahead and garnish with more of that bacon.
In case there's a butter emergency?
In case there's a butter emergency, you want to make sure that you always have some ready to go, right? You don't want to be scrambling around looking for butter at the end. I'm going to showcase one of the beautiful oysters right up on top.
Oh, look at that. Fantastic. That looks
looking pretty delicious. So hopefully you can see a nice close-up view of that. Super hearty, 3 different types of beautiful, sustainable seafood. Nice tang coming from the sourdough culture in there in the sourdough discard, and just a nice richness in there. The stock itself has got a really nice fresh seafood flavor, so it doesn't taste that super heavy kind of canned clam artificial taste. So this is a great way to enjoy a glass or a bottle of our Sauvignon Blanc. Virtú in particular, I think will work really well with this. So I hope you give it a try sometime.
Well, it looks fabulous, Todd. One quick question from Kathy. She's wondering any other great ideas for the sourdough discard?
Oh, yes. And I think I may have put some on our website on some of our recipes. I've used some into a flatbread. It's almost like a naan. I've also put some into a little bit of on the sweet side. I put some into a cupcake, a muffin. So not a cupcake, but a muffin where I use some of the discard in there to give it a little bit of tang, along with some berries and a little streusel crumble over the top there. everyone says the easiest thing is to make a pancake batter out of them. So you've got sourdough pancakes. You can make a sourdough waffle dough batter as well. So it's just a matter of using up that discard so that it doesn't become discarded, and you actually turn it into something that turns out to be really delicious.
Well, I'm looking forward to our next brunch together after those beautiful German pancakes that we had last week for Mother's Day. They were fantastic.
Those are fun.
Becky made hers. She says it's not quite as creamy as yours, but it's probably perhaps healthier. And everybody's enjoying. So thank you for that. And we hope that you join us for the lobster feed on Saturday at 2:00. You can pick up your local lobsters. Todd taught me so many new things. The butter bath for the lobsters last year was very important. The butter bath was key. Just a little extra butter. And there may be some new tips and tricks this year. So I'm looking forward to that. And we look forward to seeing you all then. And the next 2 Thursdays. Thomas, thank you so very much. It was so fascinating to have you on with us. And we learned so much and are so excited about how you're keeping the ocean healthy for us.
Oh, thank you. It was real honor, real pleasure, and what a wonderful treat. And I should not have watched this before, right before dinner. Now I'm famished. This is just amazing. You presented there. Wow.
Well, thanks for your delicious oysters. I'm glad I got to try them and work with them. So they're fantastic.
Well, we look forward to seeing you in Napa Valley and sharing some of Todd's fantastic recipes, and seeing all of you the first 2 Thursdays of next month for a little more sustainable seafood, including red wine and seafood, and lots of new tips and tricks. Thank you everyone for joining us. And until then, be well, be kind, and cheers. We'll see you all soon.